always going to recording. I usually pop in early, and sometimes I pause, and sometimes I forget to turn the recording back on, and that ends up being a bit of a hassle. Thanks, Paul. Good to see you. Christopher, good to see you. All right. I gave myself a self-imposed deadline of about 3 minutes after the hour to actually get introductions and all that kind of stuff going on. So, so what we're going to do, we'll hear from Monica for a minute, and then I'll give a little bit of a preamble to what it is we're doing here today. And then I'll introduce our main guest speaker, and we've got a couple other folks who will be chiming in a little bit later as well. So let's see, Monica, can you just?
Sure.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm not sure if I know everyone on the call, most everyone. I'm Monica Beta. I'm the Executive Director here at the North Central New Mexico Economic Development District. Thanks for joining us. We're hoping this is just going to be the first of probably several, I don't know about many, but several webinars on the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or what is now, I guess, being called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So I just want to thank Eric, who's our Disaster Recovery Coordinator, for putting this together. And why don't you kick it off, Eric, and tell us what we're all supposed to do today. Thank you.
Sounds good. Let's see. I will remove the spotlight. I'm going to throw a slide up just a sec. All right. I think and hope we're seeing an introductory slide here. That's always a little bit of fun. So yeah, so and one of the things that, let's see, there we go. One of the things that I've been hearing and seeing across the country and the many conversations we've been having here in New Mexico is there's just so much information that's available about the different funding streams that are coming with the, rolls off the tongue, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, bipartisan infrastructure law. And really some people, including myself, are struggling to, how do we make sense of this? How do we recognize it's not a historic opportunity? This is probably, maybe if we're lucky, this is a once in a generation kind of intervention to help lift up the different communities across the United States. But there are so many different pathways to find support that for organizations that are, on the smaller side, that don't have a ton of capacity, it's really difficult sometimes to find out, how to really interact with this, how to really prepare and make sure that they're doing the best they possibly can for their communities. So this is a bit of an experiment. Hopefully it's a bit of a series where we're intending to get together with people in our network across North Central New Mexico, and other folks are welcome as well, to provide a speaker or two to share some of the different aspects of the IIJA that they're involved with, and how folks can get involved. What kind of really tactical actions, what things can we do today or this week in order to prepare so that our communities do get the benefit that they possibly can. The other thing that I'm interested in is how can we do this as something of a network where we're really sharing that information across the different counties, but other different municipal governments, so that we're all kind of getting a little bit of extra benefit from each other. And then there's also, ideally, there's an opportunity for some collaboration so that we are, something that the governor said and that Mayor Chavez said in introducing how the state was responding to this, is really looking for some of those transformative projects. We know they won't all be transformative. There's a lot of need, even though it is a historic amount of money. But how can we really collaborate in order to do the best that we possibly can? So let's see, and I'm going to stop sharing. Here we go. I will make sure that our special guest is here.
I'm here.
Oh, great. Perfect, perfect. Well, in that case, I've got a slide and I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing all the good stuff. But let me pop up the slide for a second and then I'll spotlight you. Thank you. All right, so one of the events or activities that I saw just maybe, it feels like a few weeks ago, might have been over a month, was there are a variety of different resources that are available to help folks understand what is available. One of the things that I found really most useful was something called the IIJA Handbook for State and Local Government Leaders. And I saw Ellery speaking, I want to say it was maybe ELGL event, or I think I maybe have heard it through that network. So I'm going to introduce her in a second. Well, I'm starting to introduce her now, which is that she's the co-founder of the Atlas, which is, well, we'll hear a little bit more about what that is. And I want to say that this was the most useful and approachable resource that I've found in looking across the country at different sites that have popped up to help folks navigate all these different needs. Because I think it puts it in more maybe bite-sized or understandable chunks. And I thought it was really, really well organized. So I just reached out and said, hey, if you're available, we would love to hear from you and hear a little bit about what you're seeing across the country and how you got involved with this. So I'm going to stop sharing and I will highlight your video. There we go. I'm just really thankful that you could join us here today.
Are you kidding? This is the best part of my job. It is, genuinely. I'm so happy to be here. And Eric, I have to tell you, that intro to the handbook just warms my heart. I'm so glad that it's helpful. And I'm so glad, like, I hope that you all that are listening find it helpful as well. It was a project near and dear to my heart. So I'm glad I'm glad that you're finding it helpful. Okay, do you want me to intro myself? Yeah. And then we're going to talk about IIJA. We're going to talk about IIJA. By the way, this is like the Washington, DC wonk that comes out. I refer to the infrastructure law as IIJA. I can't help it. I don't live in DC anymore, but I am who I am. So when I say IIJA, that's what I'm talking about, the infrastructure law. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Ellery. As Eric said, I'm co-founder of the Atlas. I'll give you like a 2-second background on what that is and why it wasn't just me, but why I and my team wrote the handbook for state and local government leaders to IIJA. So at a really high level, the Atlas is a free online community for state and local government leaders to do 3 things. The first is to browse case studies of best practices. The second is to follow trending topics in state and local government. And the third is to post questions to one another to crowdsource ideas and get advice, basically. Before I founded the Atlas, I did a bunch of philanthropically supported consulting work with state and local government leaders to pursue basically innovative infrastructure projects. And before that, I had a fellowship at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy during the Obama administration. And while I was there, it was kind of during the fallout of the 2008 stimulus and kind of state and local governments trying to spend that money and having trouble to spend that money. And being really involved in stuff like the Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force and all that kind of good stuff. All that to say is that I and we have a really weird and unique perspective on IIJA. And that is why I felt so compelled to write the handbook, which we can talk about in a second. So what we were hearing from community members and what I was seeing was that IIJA got signed into law. It's $1.3 trillion, 550 billion in new spending. It is a mind-boggling amount of money. It's a once in a generation kind of amount of money, right? The last time we saw this kind of spending was when we built the highways. And we won't be able to see this kind of spending for a long time again. And what I was seeing and hearing, and still am, honestly, but now we actually have provided a resource to help. What I was seeing and hearing is that state and local leaders were feeling unbelievably overwhelmed by the scale that is included in IIJA and the uncertainty surrounding how the money was actually going to be spent, and what it could be spent on, and what the matching requirements were going to be, and all of, I mean, you guys all know better than I do, all of the things that get involved with spending a huge influx of federal money. And we took a step back and really said, okay, we have a once in a generation opportunity to spend this money on transformative projects, on the things that we actually need. And given the experience with ARPA and the 2008 stimulus money, we know that spending a huge influx of federal money is actually really hard, like really hard. And getting the bill signed into law was kind of the first step. And now the real work is happening, and it's happening at the state and local level with you guys that are on this call. And so the reason I keep saying but the reason that me and my team kind of pursued the handbook was to focus on what we do know about IIJA and how and what state and local government leaders can be doing right now to best position their organizations and the projects that they care about to best position them for funding, basically for federal funding. Let me pause there. Eric, is there high level kind of context that you want me to talk about before I kind of talk a little bit about what maybe some of those things are that folks can be doing?
I think I'd just go, maybe just dive in. I think that's cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So, and this is, I think, a little bit of insider baseball about what's happening in DC right now. But we know from the text of the bill itself and from what's happening at the agencies, at the federal agencies that are getting this money out the door, we know a lot more about how this money is going to be spent and on what than anybody thinks we do. And so I think fundamentally, and to be clear, the things that the money is going to be spent on are all of the kind of political goals that are associated with the bill, right? You have lots of members of Congress, you have the president, all of these folks are going to be campaigning on the success of this law in a very short amount of time. And they need to be able to, and they want to be able to point to the types of things that are being funded, and they need to be consistent with this broader story that they want to be telling and that they need to be telling. They're on the hook to be able to be telling it. What that means very practically is that the federal agencies, so Department of Transportation, FEMA, whatever, all of the agencies that are actually getting this money out the door, they are under incredible pressure. They're under a mandate from the White House and from Congress to funnel this money to those types of projects that are consistent with those goals as fast as humanly possible. Some money is going to move faster than others, and we can talk about that. But we know, basically, we know what those goals are. It's all over the internet, it's in press releases, and this is what's reflected in the handbook, by the way. Like, you'll see those goals actually outlined very specifically. It's things that you guys all know about. It's things like equity and job creation and climate change, and kind of those big picture goals. But they're outlined very specifically in the handbook. And I think what folks can be doing right now at the state and local level is taking a step back, looking at strategic plans, looking at capital improvement plans, looking at all of the consulting reports that are sitting on the shelf and the projects that are included there. And really thinking hard about kind of wish list, big wish list transformative projects, and mapping them to the goals of the legislation and saying, this project fits in this bucket. This project fits in this bucket. Oh, if we combine this project and this project together and throw a little transportation sprinkles on it, it fits in this bucket.
Mhm.
or whatever that may be. And as you go through that process, you'll start to cull and identify the kind of the Venn diagram of projects, right, that are most impactful and transformative, those big picture transformative projects that everybody has always wanted to pursue, but there was never funding for,
Mhm.
alongside with the projects that are most likely to receive big amounts of federal funding as quickly as possible. And you're looking for the sweet spot in the middle. I will say, and this is something that we communicate loud and clear, I hope, in the handbook, but that there is this whole other consideration in the mapping process about evaluating the long-term financial feasibility and sustainability of these projects, which is that, right, the name of the game is not necessarily to attract as much federal funding as humanly possible, because at the end of the day, right, like, you guys have to operate and maintain those projects, and it's a huge financial liability. So that, I don't mean to say, like, sometimes when I talk through the mapping process, it sounds like I'm encouraging people to try to just like maximize as much federal funding as humanly possible, and that's not necessarily true. But I do think you want to be able to identify the projects that are in that sweet spot, right? Long-term financially sustainable, but maybe you can't front the capital cost, but there's a plan for O&M or whatever. Let me pause there again. Eric or anybody else, things that you want me to expand on or double down on? Different things?
Let's see. I think if folks have got, so we were going to kind of hold some questions to the end, but we don't absolutely need to. So why don't we, I tell you what, if you've got a question, go ahead and either raise your hand or put that in the chat, and we can pull you up on stage.
Sure.
I mean, I have a couple of like minor questions that I was going to hold to later, but so I don't know if I should throw those in now. Well, actually, I'll throw something in now.
Yeah, please. I was going to say the only other thing that I was going to do in terms of context is just walk through for you guys what's actually in the handbook in terms of structure, so that you know what's there as a resource. Is that was the only other thing I was going to give as context. Do you want me to do that now or hold it?
I think that'll be helpful. Let me just see. Christopher's got his hand up. Let's see if what he's got to say, and then we can jump into that. That would be great.
Let's do it.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this information with us. We represent a rural area, 8 counties in northern New Mexico. So one of our challenges, it's hard to come up with that big project, that once in a lifetime. But we have a lot of little projects, and our concern is, are they going to have a fair shot at these resources? They're competing with some of the bigger municipalities that have large projects. They're trying to push money out the door, but these little projects mean a lot to their small community. How can we work with these small communities to make sure they get their fair share of this opportunity?
Are you Chris or Christopher?
I go by both.
Okay. That is a completely legitimate concern. You just introed yourself and my heart went out to you. I think it's a really legitimate thing. And I think that without a really proper strategy from like a council of governments or something like that about how to pursue this funding in a coordinated way, my biggest concern is that the money is not going to go to some of the localities that need it most. And that goes for rural, right? Really small townships, rural. It also goes for really low income, smaller cities. That's actually my biggest concern with this money. My best advice is to take, when you can, to take a step back and think about how you can combine things that would be smaller one-off projects to be either a more regional approach or a more sector-specific approach, whatever it is, to be able to tell a bigger story about what the outcomes will be of those projects. I think you are right to be concerned that small one-off projects are not going to get a fair shake. They might eventually, but it probably not in terms of near-term fast funding, and probably not in terms of the amounts that those projects deserve. So my advice would be to take a step back and see if you can expand the scope so that you can tell a more compelling story, whether it's about economic development or whatever it is, climate, economic development, whatever, what have you. And to be able to get to something that is transformative for that geography, right? Does that make sense? You want to be able to tell us, you want to be able to tell a story about why these projects taken together are transformative for the population that you were trying to be transformative for.
Thank you.
And so yeah, I think let's dive into the handbook, and then we've got a couple more questions to come up, but let's do the handbook piece first.
Please. I also, by the way, I'm not paying attention to time at all. And I can talk about this all the time. So Eric, somebody just cut me off when you want to boot me. Okay. In the handbook, just to give you guys kind of a rundown of the structure. It's broken out into sections. I tried to make it as bite-sized as possible because IIJA is a behemoth piece of legislation. The first section is a rundown of what's actually in the in the law for state and local governments. We pulled out the programs and the funding sources that are most relevant for you guys, right? Because there's a lot of direct federal spending that's not relevant. We kind of threw all of that out. And we try to include visuals whenever we humanly can. The second section is about, it's about that mapping process that I just described verbally. So it's actually like a step-by-step process of what we recommend state and local government leaders be going through right now as they're trying to identify the most promising projects to submit for federal funding. And that's, Chris, there's a section in there about zooming back and trying to actually increase project scopes in certain situations. And there's a little bit more detail in that section about what I just talked over verbally. Then there's section by section breakdowns of basically sectors. So the most affected sectors: transportation, water, broadband, resilience, and energy. I'm missing one, I think.
Legacy pollution.
Yeah,
pollution. Yep.
I got it. It took me a second, but I got it. And in each section, it gives you a rundown of what's included for that sector. And very importantly, it breaks down which type of funding is likely to trickle down to state and local government first, second, last. So for instance, money that is going through existing federal programs. So things like lead service line replacement, right? All of that money is going through existing SRFs. So that money is coming out, it's going to be imminent, right? The federal government is very used to getting that money out the door. That's not the case for something like broadband. Broadband, they're basically starting from scratch. So money for broadband is going to come out a lot more slowly. You're talking 18 months probably, versus some of the other programs some of the funding opportunity notices are already starting to come out because they're, again, they're muscles that the federal agencies are very, very used to flexing. It's a very well-trodden road. So each of the sections kind of break that down and orders them in terms of which money is likely to move most quickly. And then also in each section, there's case studies of basically example projects that are consistent with the kind of political IIJA goals, like the goals of the legislation, and could be tapped with this type of funding. The idea is to get everybody like a little inspired about what could be accomplished with certain types of money. Does that make sense? Did I miss anything? Eric, you've clicked around.
I think that's, I think you've got, well, of course you got more than the basics. And I think you mentioned also earlier, I'm going to slide into like a half question. One of the things I thought was important was that's a whole sustainability kind of aspect to things. We don't want to put a bunch of, deploy a bunch of money to make some projects start and not be able to follow through. And then everybody gets even more disappointed. Yeah. So yeah, maybe, I guess if you could expand on that a little bit, I think that was a key piece that I had really expected, but really resonated when I saw it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this attitude with a lot of folks who don't work at the local level, like who haven't been practitioners, that the answer is more money, more money, more money, more money, more money. And it helps. And in a lot of times that is a serious barrier. But there isn't any, like the money that's included in IIJA, right? You're talking about all about capital costs primarily. And there are lots of case studies of more rural townships and definitely lots of case studies of lower income minority communities that have gotten significant federal funding to build some big infrastructure project with no real plan about how it was going to be paid for over the long term. And it's become an enormous financial liability. And in situations like that, where there's no long-term plan for how the asset is going to be kind of maintained over a 50-year lifetime, sometimes even more, depending on what you're talking about, it's really irresponsible to take federal funding in that instance. It's wildly irresponsible. And you guys, same thing, you guys know this better than I do because you're experiencing it, but the political pressure at the local level to take this money and to do big things with it is enormous. And so it's like you have to weigh is this responsible and is this financially sustainable, along with the immediate outcomes that every single political leader wants to be able to point to right now. Are you guys all familiar with the organization Strong Towns?
I'm not sure. I know I am, but I'm not sure if folks are across the board. I don't think so.
So it's linked. There are a few resources from them that are linked in the handbook. In that financial sustainability section that Eric is mentioning, there's a whole section about it in the handbook, and some of their resources are linked. Strong Towns is really their whole kind of mission is to help create financially kind of sustainable, smaller cities and rural areas. And they have a whole series of articles and posts and stuff like that about federal infrastructure funding. I will tell you, they definitely have a political bent about it. The founder is like pretty libertarian, but it's not a but. So it's an invaluable resource. You just have to be aware of the fact that it's definitely written with that lens. But the resources themselves are really good and frankly, really thought-provoking, and have been invaluable to me as I've been thinking through things.
So we had a couple of questions up. Aaron, I wasn't sure if that was a question, but we're certainly glad to hear from you. And then I think James, and I've got a couple in my back pocket just in case.
Yeah, no, it was just wanting to go through the handbook.
Okay, sounds good. James, I think you had a question.
James?
Oh, well, let's see. I'm not hearing that. So actually, Ramon, we can go to you. Oh, there we are, James.
So thank you. My question is there a size of project or range of sizes that might be called a sweet spot? I mean, are we talking about no less than $1 million, no more than 100 million? Are we talking, I mean, is there some sort of range here that should be considered?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, and I would hesitate to maybe put an exact dollar amount on it, but
All right.
I think, and this gets into Chris's question, I think there's definitely a project size that's too small.
Yes.
I think there's no question about it. I don't know exactly where the cutoff is. I don't know exactly where the cutoff is, but I do know that, again, all of the kind of grant making, like all of the federal agencies that are getting this money out the door, again, they're under the gun to get big money, like as much money as they can out the door to as many transformative projects as quickly as humanly possible. So in terms of like their review criteria and stuff like that, they're definitely looking for size and scale of impact. And they're looking for size and scale of impact in the types of populations that they're on the line to deliver for. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes, that makes sense. And so I suspect that just listening to that and having some experience in this area, my guess is a lower bound of about $1 million might be appropriate. Thank you.
Yeah, the range you gave, I was like, well, that's actually probably spot on. But I didn't want to, I don't know that, I don't know that I would give a, because there are probably exceptions and all that kind of stuff. But I think the range you gave is pretty solid, I think.
Thank you very much. And part of the big issue is putting together all the requirements for a project and all the planning in the kind of time frame that you're talking about.
Oh yeah, that's 1,000%. And I think that's why, as I was talking with state and local leaders right after the bill got signed, I was like, well, what are you guys doing? And some of these folks from either more rural communities or from really low income and minority communities were like, well, we're just not doing anything because we don't want to like spend a bunch of time getting something ready and then submit it and then not get the funding. And we've been burned too many times, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, my reaction was like, ooh, but to have any chance of getting this funding, the prep work needs to start now to be able to get those projects ready and to get those applications ready so that when the notice of funding opportunities are announced, you're kind of like ready to strike, and that you have a game plan. And listen, like it's a really difficult situation. It's not, there's no clear-cut thing to do. And I think that's why my recommendation generally is to start with all of the things that have been really well fleshed out in your community or for your organization for a while. So that's why I was saying, like, look at capital improvement plans and strategic plans and consulting reports and those types of things, because generally speaking, hopefully there's more to draw from there. But yeah, it's a really difficult thing.
Thank you. That answered my question.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it. Ramon, you had a question.
Yes, thank you so much, Eric, and thank you, Elroy, for the presentation. So given the political goals that come with the funding, and some of the points that we're talking about, one of my questions is, are you aware of how existing programs are going to be used in a manner that will be different than they're currently used today to reach? And primarily my work is with unincorporated communities, public water systems that are really small, who don't have the resources. Some of them have ICIPs, others don't. Most of them don't have planning documents like PERs and things like that. And so how is what you just talked about going to translate to existing programs that, like SRF programs, that will be used in a different manner than they're used in the past to achieve some of this for smaller communities?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a really tricky question. It is not something that the Biden administration has fully figured out. They are trying desperately. So there are a few things that have happened. I don't know how closely you guys follow this stuff, but there have been a couple of executive orders that have been signed to direct federal agencies to spend a certain percentage of money from grants in certain types of communities. All of those things are kind of in progress from a top-down standpoint, right? And again, the awarding agencies are under a mandate to get a large amount of this money, or as much as they humanly can, to disadvantaged communities. And so the good news is that for the first time, there's that kind of mandate, which is a good thing. What there is not, and my biggest concern, is that is not being combined with really significant change about the processes that are exclusionary for these organizations or for these communities. So and we're talking about it, but the process to actually get applications submitted is really enormously burdensome when you're talking about some of these communities. I mean, there's enormous hurdles there. And I have heard a lot of things about that they want, the federal agencies want more communities, and they're desperate for more communities like the ones that you described to be getting this type of money. And the self-awareness is very low about the fact that their processes and their requirements are a lot of times the things that make it so difficult for these organizations to apply. And I think that awareness is growing, and they're all ramping up technical assistance. And I'm hopeful that the combination of the enormous political pressure alongside what I think is a really earnest desire to help from these kind of bureaucrats in DC, I'm hoping that the combination of the two actually moves the needle. But it's the thing that it's the thing that keeps me up at night, frankly. It's the thing that keeps me up at night. I don't really know that answered your question. I'm sorry. In full transparency, right? Like, I don't work for the Biden administration. So I criticize them a lot for the fact that they're not actually solving this for you guys. I don't know. I'm sorry.
And we'll hear a little bit from Ramon after this segment. We've got one more question from Alex, and then I've got sort of a two-parter that cool. Hopefully won't be. It'll be fine. Alex, cool. Did you had a question?
Yes, yeah. And thank you very much for the time. I just had a quick question for you as it relates to your understanding of whether or not there's any funding sources for any type of energy efficiency improvements to building and infrastructure, things of that nature, and funding sources for workforce development. Don't necessarily need to know if there are, what exactly those are. Just before I dive into it, will I expect to find anything of that nature?
So It depends on the specifics of the project talking about and like kind of the scope around them.
Mhm.
So yes, if the energy efficiency stuff is combined with other resilience measures, right? You can maybe tap into work money, or you can tap into it. It depends on some of the specifics surrounding it. Like I was just talking with, where were they? A local government in Florida, in South Florida, about the fact that they were going to combine energy efficiency upgrades alongside kind of brownfield remediation and use some of the legacy pollution money to kind of pursue both at the same time. There isn't like a magical pot of money for energy efficiency upgrades like outright. There isn't like a magical pot of money, but I think energy efficiency upgrades can 1000% be pursued as a part of like a lot of these projects. Does that make sense?
Oh, certainly. I think it does contribute to resiliency in a manner, in a way. I just didn't know how hardline the infrastructure had to be. Like there's a fundamental difference between, okay. Well, great, that's helpful. Yeah.
What was the second part of your question?
Workforce development. I mean, it's called Jobs Act. Is there a lot of money?
So this is another one of my big criticisms of the law. You guys are hitting on, you guys are hitting on all of the, I think, weak points of the legislation, which is that one of the big criticisms that I have of the law is that there is not a lot, I don't think, meaningful to help with two primary issues that I see, one of which is workforce development and the other is actually procurement reform, which are two of the big barriers to actually doing anything transformative at the state and local level. And there isn't a lot there. I wrote a whole op-ed about the fact that there isn't a lot there on workforce. There are specific set-asides in specific programs. Like there's workforce development set-asides in a bunch of the transportation programs. But there's nothing like, not at the scale that I think needs to be done. It's kind of like onesie twosies, like one-offs. They're buried within specific programs. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well,
And I'll
thank you
say,
very much.
Paul from our North Central team, he added a comment in the chat as far as some other resources. But I made a personal promise to myself that we wouldn't keep you too long, and we haven't kept you necessarily too long, but I also do want to respect your time. Let's see, and I guess let's see. Boy, I've got a choice here. I was going to ask a little bit about procurement, or actually, I'll give the choice to you. First of all, one of the reasons we're meeting is to have this kind of hashing out of what the real problems are so that we can really continue to have those conversations, try and find the resources, look to your site and others, and work with each other to help out. So thank you. I'm
glad this is helpful. I feel like I'm kind of helping, but also kind of not, mostly commiserating.
Well, and I think here's the thing. This is a situation where there's not a perfect solution.
Yeah.
So recognizing that that's not perfect, but that there's some good stuff and we can do things, I think that's essential. So it's bringing these people together to talk about this that I think is appropriate for this phase.
And I think one of the things that and this is what I remind myself of, which is that the purely because of the dollar amount that's included in IIJA, you're talking about a lot of zeros. So even if we make an improvement on like 5 to 10% of that amount of money, it's still unbelievably transformative for the communities that those projects affect. And this is the beauty of working in state and local government, right? You're talking about just like enormous scale of impact because of the types of projects that we're talking about, the kind of inherent impact involved in them. And so when we talk about something like procurement, it's like, well, there's no solving that problem outright. That's not going to happen anytime soon. But even if we make a marginal 5 to 10% improvement, you're talking about just unbelievable scale of impact. And that's the kind of thing I try to remind myself of, that in terms of what we're actually trying to do, because we're not going to fix the structural issues with IIJA and with something like procurement. It's not, it's beyond what any one of us controls. But a marginal impact is still, because of what we're talking about and the populations that we're talking about, is still transformative impact.
With that, any final, first of all, I want to thank Ellery for joining us, for putting the handbook together and founding the Atlas. Any last thing that you'd suggest for our folks, for our local government leaders?
The only thing that I would say is that if you guys, and I know that you have access to lots of these types of resources through this group, if you are interested, I definitely encourage you to request to join the Atlas. It's just for state and local leaders. The reason I say that is because we're getting ready to do a series of basically small roundtables, listening sessions on different sectors included in IIJA, and bringing together a national group of folks, like 8 to 10 local leaders on each topic, to share what their organizations are doing very specifically to get ready for funding. So if that's something that's like an additional resource, again, it's all free, but that's an additional resource that you guys can tap into. And I'd be happy to have any of you all participate, basically.
Well, thanks again. Thanks very much for participating and joining us here today. Let's see, I'm going to go back to our slide
Bye,
deck
guys.
just a second. Thanks. All right. And oh, I didn't do the good version yet. It disappeared. Oh, there we go. Let's see. I think that's showing up. All right. So on to the next piece. We've got, of course, many different areas of interest that we want to cover, but we knew we wouldn't have a ton of time. So one of the folks that we work with fairly often, consider a partner in some ways, it's the Rural Community Assistance Corporation, RCAC. And Ramon, who you heard a little bit earlier, is on the call. I was wondering, Ramon, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a couple of the different things that, one of the things you mentioned earlier, but what are you seeing when you're talking with the communities out here in our region?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Eric, for the invitation to speak a little bit about that. So I think that, given the conversation that we were just having, and that this funding could potentially be so transformational to many of the projects that will get funded. One of the concerns that many of us have, I think, in New Mexico is the ability to access the funding, first of all, right? So do we have the capacity in some of our smaller communities to actually compete for some of this funding based on, our inability to really kind of do a lot to prepare for it? And so, those are some of the kind of conversations that we're having with some of the smaller, again, unincorporated communities that make up a large portion of our rural communities across the state that provide safe drinking water. So that's one of the things that we're kind of talking about. And we really proactively reached out to the advisory group that the governor appointed to try to be a part of the conversation, so that we can hopefully try to understand, how everything that Allery was just talking about gets translated into local funding programs, and how we get access to some of that funding for some of our smaller communities. So so I don't know that we have any real clear answers or a path ahead as far as what we're going to do. I think that we're really kind of just trying to understand what the state of New Mexico is going to do and what process they're going to take to kind of do some of this work. So I think that just the opposite of the transformational piece, I think it would be a real tragedy if we weren't able to do some transformational work in some of our smaller communities.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Let's see, and folks are asking for your contact information. I think we got your email and RCAC. Any other place that people should look for information with you?
Yeah, I think that, thank you, Felicity and Eric, for posting both of those on there. So you can reach me at that email address and you can look up our organization. So just a little bit more about our organization. So we're a nonprofit organization that provides technical, managerial, and financial capacity building services to communities under 10,000, with a special focus of communities of 3,300 in population or less. So that's kind of some of the work that we do. The work that we do in communities is at no cost to the community. So we're funded through appropriations that we receive under programs like HHS or USDA or EPA. And that's the way we do our work in the communities.
Great, great.
And then I also wanted to just close, maybe Eric, and I can email this to you, Eric, and maybe you can get out to folks. So NEJAC, which is the National Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, just received the kind of Justice 40 piece of some of the bill funding. And it talks a little bit about how, like a percentage of the funding will need to be used for disadvantaged communities, as Elroy was talking about. So I'll send that 3-page document over to you so you can send out to the rest of the group as well.
All right, I'm typing a little something in the chat here, just a sec. All right, yeah, so please, we actually had, or I set it up incorrectly at first. So we had just a regular, you jump in on the call, and then we also had a registration version. So if you didn't go through the registration version, that means I don't necessarily have your email to follow up with you. But you can go ahead and drop that in the chat, or if you don't feel comfortable with that, go ahead and send it direct to me. I've got one last screen to deal with before we head out for today, and that is, did you find, I'm curious, do folks find this useful? We're looking at, as we mentioned at the top, sort of a series of, and I like it, sort of this almost informal kind of approach where we have an opportunity to not only share some of the different more tactical things that we can do about these different funding opportunities, but also have an opportunity for us to discuss these things with each other. So I'm curious about what topics are most on your mind right now, and that we can cover and prioritize in the future. And otherwise, if there are comments or thoughts that you have about how we can do this better, and how we can better serve you and help you serve the folks that are in your area.
Well, Eric, since everyone's so quiet, I can jump in. I think our intention is, as we see funding opportunities be announced, we will probably organize a webinar like this. I mean, funding opportunities that would be relevant for our region, to kind of provide an overview, see who's interested in applying. I was kind of, I guess, a little bit surprised, but happy at what our speaker talked about us needing to team up, because that's kind of what we were thinking without having heard that directly from anybody, that we would probably need to team up some of these applications in the region in order to make them competitive. So I think there is going to be need to be more of a coordinated approach on some of these opportunities. So we'll just we'll be looking out as things get announced, and trying to keep everybody in the loop on that. And it looks like a lot of you are responding to what your priorities are and you want us to keep an eye out for. So that's kind of the general approach we were going to take. Is that right, Eric?
Yes, that is. And it sounds, I'm aware of a couple of, or at least one sort of fund that's being put together to help in the planning for some of these different projects. So that was really promising to see. I don't want to release that before it gets fully cooked. Yeah, that's, what are the things that we can do to help kind of on the early side of things? Thank you, Shanna and Julie and Linda. Yes, thank you, Ramon. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, so finding ways where we can share these a little bit more fluidly. I put up our websites. as you can see, and one of the challenges we have is that there really is so much information and so many other resources to go to that it's really difficult to kind of wade through that. So want to try and provide some opportunities to have that kind of cross-cutting conversations among different, different people who are working in this, and yeah, to raise those kinds of issues or raise those kinds of opportunities that people are really, finding traction on. I'll mention, since we've got like 2 or 3 minutes left, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but one of the things that we talked about doing, maybe not far in the future, is that the transportation arena is really, it feels like that's pretty well covered and very well organized. But for some of the people on the call, and Paul, who's also in video, he's waving his hand, they've got a really good structure for this. But if you're not involved with that process, it might be helpful to kind of learn a little bit more about how it is they are pursuing things, just in case the project you are looking at might have some overlap with transportation. So that's one of kind of on my short list of the next time that we do this, is to invite Paul in and talk a bit more about that. But for now, we've got, I can give you a minute or two back. I just want to thank Monica, Christopher, and both, especially Ramon and Ellery and her group at the Atlas for joining us here today. And look forward to working with you all to try and make the most of this historic opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.